Hey everyone, and welcome to this new episode, which I have to record quickly because I have to go play a game of Warhammer 40k trying out my new orcs. So, in this one, we have GNOME having trouble with their icon themes, but also looking for more funding because apparently they started tapping into their reserves. We also have the rumors of NixOS's death being greatly exaggerated because while the project has some problems, it is far from over. And we also have some fun news about Windows 11 actually losing market share to Windows 10, which is going end of life really soon. And we also have Mint trying to fork some GNOME apps because they just don't want to deal with GTK4 and Adwaita anymore. And we also have this segue to our sponsor. This video is sponsored by SquareSpace, and chances are you all know what SquareSpace is, but if you don't, just know that they're your all-in-one solution to create and run your own website. Squarespace has all the tools you need to start your website, improve it, even without knowing anything about code. They have pre-made layouts that you can customize heavily in terms of the colors, of block placement, just by drag and drop. It's really easy to use. You can create all your pages, but you also have plenty of modules, like anything you need to run a store, complete with online payment. You have a members-only area. You have a logo creator. You can even buy your own domain name that you will need to have a serious website straight from Squarespace. So they're your all-in-one platform to let you create and run that website. So to get started with Squarespace, just click the link in the description or head over to squarespace.com/thelinuxexperiment and you'll get 10% off your first website. So we need to discuss what is currently happening with NixOS. A few people asked me to cover this. I thought I would mention it here, but it probably deserves an entire video because it goes pretty deep. The gist of it is that the NixOS community is imploding right now after a bunch of issues were either ignored or silenced over the years. It is not linked to the code or the project itself, but more to its general governance. First, there have been moderation issues in the NixOS community for a while. There was no real coordination between moderators, with mods reacting after the fact to insulting or offending behavior instead of taking a more proactive stance, meaning that some people were attacked repeatedly before their attackers were finally removed, and it's never a great place to be in. A code of conduct was later adopted, but it didn't seem to really be followed, and as usual when the code of conduct is introduced, some people started complaining about being restricted in their free speech or whatever nonsense just should not even exist in a code-oriented community. Seriously, if you go to a forum about an application or a distribution and you start attacking people for anything other than their opinions on that project, then you should get the hell out of here. Your free speech doesn't exist in here. Now then, there was the issue of some NixOS conventions being sponsored by companies involved in the military-industrial complex, which didn't sit well with the community, but were repeated the following year without really taking these concerns into account at all. Finally, there were concerns about the company built on top of NixOS, Determinate Systems, acting like they would just call the shots for Nix and how the community should act, with the main founder of Nix acting a bit tone deaf and silencing the concerns over moderation, over inclusion, as if they didn't exist, and basically saying we can accept money from anyone as long as it helps the project grow. The general feeling seems to be very negative right now around NixOS, with a bunch of maintainers and contributors flat out leaving the project. Now this does not mean NixOS is dying, because the general package manager behind the distro, Nix, and its repos, Nix packages, are very healthy, and the NixOS Foundation isn't really the main way Nix as a project survives. It gathers the funding, but it doesn't mean funding would disappear if the NixOS Foundation was ditched. There are some inklings that forks could happen, or that the community could maybe jettison the current foundation and reorganize around something else, but it's a bit early to tell what will happen. So if you see anything super alarmist or clickbaity along the lines of NixOS is dying, then no, it's not really. There have been plenty of other distributions that had the same community-based concerns. Look at Manjaro and the terrible, no good management of that distribution and the company around it. The distro is still fine, even though they still fail to renew their certificates now and again, and the creator sort of ignored their chief financial officer's warnings about buying hardware for certain contributors. There were also problems with Ubuntu, with the Amazon link back in the day, or them just grabbing projects and removing every maintainer that isn't from Canonical. But the both of these distros are still fine today, and Nix will probably be fine in the future as well. They might have a smaller community in the end, a more focused one, maybe they will split in two, but in the end NixOS will still exist as a distro. There have been multiple reports of applications not made for GNOME, so not using GTK, that now look broken with missing icons everywhere. One of the affected apps seemed to be Kate, KDE's powerful text editor, and this apparently isn't new because it's been the case since GNOME 44. Now this would not really be an issue if the bug reports hadn't been closed, on the basis of we can't do anything about it. Fortunately, it was reopened afterwards with a few potential solutions being discussed. The core of the issue is that the GNOME icon theme, Adwaita, simply doesn't really follow the free desktop spec anymore for naming their icons, and thus it will break things on applications made for other desktops. But since the Adwaita icon theme is still installed as an icon theme in the correct folders, it is made available to all apps like any other theme, meaning that these apps will assume it supports everything they need when it doesn't. Now, after some relatively heated conversations, GNOME offered to add a fallback to Tango, which is a pretty old theme that uses colored icons, so things won't look too good, but at least they won't be broken. Apps will use the Adwaita icons if they exist, and use a Tango icon instead if Adwaita doesn't have what they need. Another alternative that was offered is to use the Adwaita icon theme from GNOME 43, which still has all these icons with this older naming convention. People from KDE would also be amenable to just make Breeze the default icon theme as a fallback when the default icon theme the user set is missing an icon. The app would start by using the user's icon theme, and if anything is missing, they would fall back to Breeze. And this all goes back to the much larger theming discussions. Some people think that apps from another desktop should be themed so they at least sort of look consistent. Some people think it gives a false sense of similarity, when in fact applications will just not behave the same at all because they have very different UIs and UXs. But also that these applications will probably be broken because it is virtually impossible to create a one-to-one replica of a GTK theme for Qt apps and vice versa. In the end, I personally don't really care, no matter the outcome. If theming just dies, I won't be too sad about it, and if theming is maintained as the current status quo, as sort of a hack that kinda works, then great, some people will enjoy that, and that's no issue for me either. And still on GNOME, the GNOME Foundation is going to focus on raising more funds, as they apparently hit the buffers of their financial reserves after operating at a loss for more than 3 years. They apparently had been living off big donations received a while back, but they hadn't made enough money back to compensate for this spending, and so they've now hit the threshold at which they really should not tap into these reserves anymore. And if you're thinking to yourself, wait, didn't they just get €1 million as a development grant? Yes, but they cannot use that money for day-to-day operations. The grant came with a few specific projects and they have to use the funds for these specific development projects. Now, raising funds is apparently why they hired their recent new director, Holly Million, for her experience on doing exactly that, raising funds for non-profit organizations. She apparently is now more familiar with GNOME and how it works and the missions and the goals, and so there's now a plan in place to start fundraising to ensure GNOME can keep operating. They have a break-even budget that the GNOME Foundation will have to approve in October. GNOME will also expand the board a little bit more, going from 7 to 9 members, so there are more opinions and voices, and less work for each individual board member. And they will also create non-voting seats, so other parts of the community can also be heard. And I hope they can find good avenues for funding. It's been quite impressive to see what they are able to achieve once they get proper funding with the Sovereign Tech Fund, this €1 million grant. They've been firing on all cylinders, and a lot of big features are happening and will come in GNOME 47 and 48. So if they can find some equivalent funding in the future, we can probably expect GNOME to go forwards even faster, and that's good for everyone. And we also have some pretty fun news about Windows. It looks like Windows 11 is losing market share to Windows 10. Windows 11 is steadily declining, now down to 26% of the Windows market share, with Windows 10 still holding 70% of Windows users, which is kind of insane if you think about it, because Windows 10 won't be supported for much longer for individuals, and Windows 11 has been out for ages now. And of course, if you look at the recent news about Windows 11, it is not too hard to understand why. Ads are everywhere in the OS, it is more privacy invasive than ever, it has very few new features compared to Windows 10 to entice people to switch, and AI is being crammed everywhere, which for some people is a plus, but I'm pretty sure that for a lot of others it is a deterrent. If you combine that with the horror stories about virtually every single update to Windows breaking a critical part of the system, plus Microsoft's nagging inside of the OS for you to use Edge, or ads in their own products like the file manager, and I don't think many people will be surprised that a lot of people don't want to use Windows 11. And this is an excellent opportunity for Linux, because Windows 10 users will get booted off once their OS is no longer supported, some of them will look for a new home, and some Windows 11 users will just want to leave, and, well, they can't go back to Windows, so either they buy a brand new computer for a Mac, or they go to Linux. Our best chance of growing has always been when the most popular OS makes a big blunder, and that's what Windows has been doing repeatedly since Windows 11 has been introduced, so this is probably why we're seeing such growth for Linux right now, and let's hope it continues. Now, Linux Mint will apparently start forking GNOME applications to make their own. Their app collection, called X-Apps, depends on GNOME technologies, notably GTK. But as GNOME focuses on libadwaita, that is designed for GNOME and not really for other desktops, Mint thinks that they should not rely on them anymore. The other reason seems to try and make sure other desktops can band together to collaborate on these applications. Stuff like Mate, XFCE, or Budgie could collaborate on a single set of GTK-based apps that respect all of these desktops' guidelines. Mint says that they don't want to make Linux Mint apps, they want to make Linux apps that work everywhere. Now, Mint also says that they want their apps to be designed by people who actually care about their desktop, and thus they don't want to use libadwaita apps. They will fork GTK 3 versions of these applications, namely Celluloid, GNOME Calculator, Simple Scan, the Baobab Disk Space Analyzer, the System Monitor, GNOME Calendar, and the Archive Manager. Mint says that they cannot blame GNOME for building apps that are meant for GNOME. It is entirely normal. But Mint wants to, as they say, send a strong signal that they won't support applications that don't support Mint's users and environment, and so they also won't promote them. It looks like they will have changes in the software manager to list applications that are compatible, which just seems to mean applications that are themable. Mint will also remove the Adwaita icon theme from their install, because it only provides icons that are used by GNOME, and so it can look broken on other desktops, as we mentioned earlier in this episode. Other planned changes for Mint include hiding unverified Flatpak apps by default in the software manager and adding a matrix client. Now, this is all along the lines of what Linux Mint has been doing for ages. They use a specific base, but they mercilessly uproot everything that they don't like, which is totally fine. Now, on this particular issue, I think they're right. They should have apps that feel right at home on their desktop. A desktop environment should not ship apps that look completely out of place by default. But also, I think they sort of misunderstand what working means, because an app that doesn't look at home works. It just doesn't look right. The theme is not a mandatory condition for an application to be run on a specific computer. So having the default apps look like Mint apps by forking them, that's awesome, especially if they can make sure that every other desktop bands together so all of these apps can get more contributions. But filtering out applications that don't support your theme, I think that goes a bit too far. It's really weird as a system. Now, joining the New York Times in suing OpenAI and Microsoft are now 8 more newspapers, including the New York Daily News, the Chicago Tribune, and more. This suit is filed in the same district as the one from the New York Times, which potentially opens the door to combining both lawsuits. And the plaintiffs said that they elected to sue OpenAI instead of attempting to negotiate a deal. The basis is the same as the New York Times suit. OpenAI allegedly used their content without authorization to fuel a commercial product, and they removed any copyright management information like journalist names and titles. They're also accusing OpenAI of damaging their reputation by using their publications' names in OpenAI's results and answers, even when the AI hallucinates bad answers that would tarnish the image of said publications. And as with the New York Times, OpenAI doesn't really have a real defense here. They're fighting the NYT lawsuit by saying their AI reproducing entire articles verbatim is a bug. But that doesn't answer the point of the suit, which is that they use these articles without authorization, and that's painfully obvious. The fact that they also struck deals with other publishers to compensate them for using their content also indicates that they know they should compensate creators. I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a judge, and I'm not from the US, so some technicalities probably escape me, but I really fail to see how OpenAI could ever win any of these lawsuits, because it is very clear that they did use this content without authorization, and it is very clear that they know they shouldn't have because they paid other publishers to do the same thing. So we'll see how judges rule, but honestly, this will be very impactful, because if judges decide that this is completely unlawful, then some AI tools will probably die. They just don't have the business model to pay for everything they used in their training. And if judges rule the other way, saying that training an AI on public data is completely fair use, it will have really damaging repercussions on basically every single creator and every single publication out there. So we'll have to wait and see how things evolve. But you won't have to wait to see this segue to our sponsor. If you're looking for a new computer, you plan to run Linux on it, and you want to spend your money towards a company that supports Linux, check out Tuxedo Computers in the link in the description below. They make devices that ship with Linux out of the box. They actually contribute their patches and fixes upstream to support all this hardware, and they actually have repos you can add to a lot of distros to implement those fixes if they haven't been accepted upstream yet. They have a big range of devices that will cover every price point and every need. All their computers are very customizable. You can open, repair, and upgrade all their laptops, and they just are a great choice. All I use these days are Tuxedo computers. My channel is run on one of their laptops, and all my gaming is done on one of their desktops. So if you need a new computer, you want to run Linux, and you want to support a company that actually supports Linux, click the link in the description below and give them a shot. They're really, really good. So thanks everyone for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, you know what to do. There are the usual YouTube pleasantries under this video. And if you really enjoyed the channel, there are plenty of ways to support it down in the description as well. So thanks for watching, and I guess you'll see me in the next one. Bye!